Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. Today's topic is the suggestion of patron Gelly Elfson, who wanted to be the first of my patrons to suggest a play by William Shakespeare. The exact choice was up to me, and so I've decided to stick with a theme and cover one of his more fantastical plays, and a personal favorite of mine, A Midsummer Night's Dream. It was first printed in the year 1600, although most scholars believe it was originally written and produced in 1595 or 96. About the author. Boy. A lot of people have said a lot of things about William Shakespeare, including myself during the Deus Ex Let's Play. But let's begin at the beginning. Shakespeare was baptized in April of 1564, and so he was probably born a few days before then. His home was a small town called Stratford-upon-Avon in Warwickshire, which is part of the Western Midlands region of England. His family was part of the emerging middle class of professional artisans in England, and so he got a basic education in English and Latin, and then got married at the young age of 18. Not much is known about Shakespeare's early life, since surviving records are sparse, but we know for a fact that he was writing plays in London by 1592, because something that has survived is a critical pamphlet written by a London playwright that made fun of his peers, including a poorly educated upstart of an actor who believed he could write plays that could compete with university-educated authors. And as it turns out, he could. In 1594, Shakespeare joined the Lord Chamberlain's Men, an acting company owned by its members. In 1599, they built their own theatre and called it the Globe. And in 1603, the company got a royal charter and renamed itself the King's Men. By this point, Shakespeare had become quite wealthy and famous. In his later years, Shakespeare moved away from writing and acting and spent more of his time and money on real estate investment. Partly he did this because land ownership was more prestigious than theatre at the time, and partly it was because the bubonic plague was running through London for most of the first decade of the 17th century. Large public gatherings were regularly banned to slow the plague's progress, and that made theatre a very unstable industry. Sadly, Shakespeare's health also proved unstable, and he died in 1616 at the age of 52, most likely of a sudden fever that came on after a night of drinking. Over the centuries since his death, Shakespeare's plays have been pretty consistently in production and on stages throughout England and the growing Anglosphere. Although the list of well-regarded plays, and the ways in which they were adapted and rewritten, have gone through a lot of evolution. For instance, for a long time, Romeo and Juliet was most popular when it was rewritten to have a happy ending, and it was only fairly recently that people even considered looking at the Jewish moneylender Shylock with a bit of sympathy. There have also been no end of adaptations, like Romeo and Juliet as a New York City musical, Richard III but set in a fascist 1930s England, and The Taming of the Shrew as a high school comedy. In some cases, they stick to the text so completely that it stops making sense, and in other cases they change the plot and dialogue so much that you can barely sense Shakespeare's influence. Today's play was written relatively early into Shakespeare's career, but it was still after the point where he had made a name for himself. For a long time it was considered a popular but vacuous comedy, but starting in the 20th century, critics noticed just how deep the themes and motifs went. But why tell you what other people thought? That's what I'm here to do. The review. In ancient Greece, Theseus, the Duke of Athens, and Hippolyta, the Queen of the Amazons, will be getting married in 4 days. However, the Athenian courtier Aegeus is having trouble with his daughter Hermia. He wants her to marry Demetrius, who loves her, but she loves Lysander, whom Aegeus dislikes. Since her father won't budge, Hermia decides to run away with Lysander, and Demetrius goes after her. Then, going after Demetrius is Helena, who loves him, but is not loved in turn. Meanwhile, Quince, Bottom, and some other actors go into the woods to practice a play for Theseus's wedding. Quince is a stressed-out director, Bottom is a semi-professional with an overinflated ego, and the rest are complete amateurs who have no idea what they're doing. Meanwhile again, Oberon and Titania, the king and queen of fairies, are in the middle of a marital spat, and just so happen to be in the same woods as the fleeing lovers and amateur actors. Oberon has his servant Puck grab a flower of true love so he can play a trick on his wife, but when he sees the lovers pass by, he takes pity on Helena and has Puck also use the flower on Demetrius so that he'll fall in love with her. However, Puck finds Lysander first, and when he sees Helena, he falls in love with her and everything gets messy. Later on, Puck spots Bottom and the players and decides to turn Bottom's head into that of an ass since it fits his personality, and he arranges for Bottom as the ass to meet Titania, since her falling in love with him would be hilarious. Antics ensue, but eventually Oberon and Puck straighten out the lovers so that everyone's happy. Titania makes up with Oberon, Bottom gets his human head back, and all the Greeks go back to Athens to watch the actors put on a hilariously terrible play. So the first thing I should say is that A Midsummer Night's Dream, like all of Shakespeare's plays, can be a difficult read. The English language has done a lot of changing and adapting in the past 400 years, and as such, there are a lot of references and plays on words in Shakespearean plays that would have been witty and hilarious to contemporary viewers, but are completely lost on today's audiences. My copy of Shakespeare's works is heavily annotated, and every column of play dialogue has around 5 to 10 footnotes explaining all the turns of phrase we just don't use today. However, Midsummer Night can still work as a modern comedy. While many of the jokes and puns are lost on a modern audience, the main humor of the play depends on mix-ups, slapstick, pranks, and bad acting, and all of those things are still as funny today as they were in Shakespeare's time. Plus, a few of the jokes still work in modern English. In particular, the word ass still carries all of the meanings of bottom, donkey, and pompous idiot that Shakespeare used. If there's any real criticism to be had of the play, it's that few of the characters have any real independent personalities. Instead, they all tend to represent broad archetypes like Theseus, the serious noble, Puck, the trickster, Bottom, the egocentric actor, and then there's the four lovers, who aren't very distinguishable outside of whom they're infatuated with at any given time. But this does ultimately work to the play's advantage. The absurd plot would have felt out of place if it happened to more realistic characters, and the fact that the lovers are interchangeable means that the audience doesn't feel horrified when Puck uses magic mind control to resolve the love triangle. Now, of course, Shakespeare's works are all old enough that they're all in the public domain, so there should be no cost involved if you just want to go out and read the script. In fact, you can probably find a free version that's covered in annotations that can help you understand the more obscure words and turns of phrase. However, if you want the best experience of any Shakespearean play, you should go out and watch a live performance. That's how his plays are meant to be experienced. And if you can find a good production company with a good director, you won't even care that you can't understand half of what they're saying. And so, while I recommend that people give A Midsummer Night's Dream a read, I strongly recommend that you give it a watch instead. Just skip the movie. That's not as good. The analysis. A Midsummer Night's Dream is all about illusions. As such, it's also all about dreams, fantasies, magic, theatrical plays, and love. It's about dreams because all of the transformational magic happens while the subjects are asleep. They wake up, and the world is different in some way. And then when they go back to sleep, the magic is removed, and the world is back to normal. It's as if the strangeness was nothing but a dream, a hallucination that has nothing to do with the real world. And after all, isn't that exactly what a play is? It's about fantasies because the play is set in ancient Greece, but features English myths about fairies. Now, Shakespeare was never one to care about historical accuracy in any of his plays, including the ones based on history, but he could certainly tell the difference between a local folk myth and an ancient Hellenic myth. But in the play, he smashes them all together, because accuracy was less important to him than taking his audience on a journey to distant places that they would never see in person, and bringing to life mythological figures that they had only read or heard stories about. It's about love, because love is blind and love is fleeting. The lovers each have a preferred subject for their affections, but they're all basically identical in terms of status, merit, character, and personality. It would be much easier for everyone if Demetrius could just fall in love with Helena, and there's no real reason why he shouldn't, except that he fell in love with Hermia first. And in the end, because the play is a comedy, that's exactly what he does. And in the meantime, we see characters falling in love in other directions because Puck keeps screwing up, and since he keeps fixing them, each infatuation hardly lasts more than a day. And meanwhile, Titania fawns over a dumbass with an ass for a head, and Oberon eventually calls off his prank because he gets jealous. But most of all, A Midsummer Night's Dream is a play about plays. It's a self-aware comedy that makes fun of the medium, the actors, the scripts, and the audience. That's why the play continues after the love conflict gets resolved, because it's not done until it finishes making fun of itself. And then after that, and after the fairy king and queen have blessed Theseus' marriage, Puck walks up to the audience, thanks them for watching, and asks for a round of applause. For if we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme is no more yielding but a dream. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.